Hello, welcome to the first episode of Sally's Astrology Book Club. I learned astrology so many years ago that there were no podcasts, no webinars, no internet even to find astrology knowledge, and even actual astrologers were pretty few and far between, especially for someone growing up like I did in a town actually called Normal, Illinois. So astrology books were my first teachers and really my continuing teachers over 50 years later. I've been writing about the astrology books that I've been reading and loving for quite a few years now. My blogs are up on my website, sallyducharme.com, and on my Facebook page, Sally's Astrology Book Club. But I like to use celebrity charts when I am writing about a book, just so I can show how to put the techniques described by the author into practice. And so since I've been talking about celebrity charts on this channel, I thought I would bring the two, my blog and my video channel, together to talk with you about an astrology book, some exciting techniques, and then using the chart of someone well known to demonstrate them. And so the book I've been reading this month has been Stephen Forrest, The Book of Fire. He's written a book on each of the four elements. Spoiler alert, I'm going to be following through in Aries season. I'm doing the Book of Fire. Taurus season, I'll do the Book of Earth. Gemini season, the Book of Air. And Cancer season, the Book of Water, just to bring it full circle. And so there are many, many wonderful pieces of wisdom in this Book of Fire, but he particularly focuses on the fire of our sun. You know, even if you think, oh, I don't have any fire signs emphasized in my chart, we all have a sun. And Stephen Forrest is very strong in his belief that if we tune into that life force of the sun, what the sign tells us about it, the placement in the chart, and we steer ourselves towards that sun, we're going to live a very joyful, purposeful life. But he said one interesting thing that we tend to overlook a bit when looking at prediction is how powerful the progressed sun is in our charts. That we not only, are born, for example, in Aries, full of fire and determined to have our own way and to break new ground and to blaze new trails and to be very independent. But as we move through life, that sun in our secondary progressed chart, remember that's when the sun is moved about a degree per year of life. And so as that progressed sun moves through our chart, it forms different points and angles to places in our chart that mark turning points. But also, what's most exciting is that progressed sun eventually moves into the subsequent sign, where it will stay for 30 years and then move to the next sign. So if we talk about our Aries, for example, maybe at, 17, 18, 19, 20, so depending on where the sun was in Aries when he was born, he's been very independent, kind of blazing his own trail. But once that progressed sun moves into Taurus, there's a need to build something significant. Maybe he builds, Aries spirit builds his own very solid business. So using that initial core of that Aries impetus, but yet doing something very Taurus-like. 30 years later, perhaps this person has, his business has kind of taken him as far as it can go, and he's very curious. He's looking for variety. He wants to maybe go back to school or maybe sell everything and rent an RV and drive across the country. So that Gemini energy of looking for variety, change, information, the wonders of the world, again, part of that Aries spirit of wanting to kind of break into new territory, but yet bringing the Gemini love of curiosity and exploration and learning with it. And so if we think about then different people who've had that transition in our life, one of the people I was thinking experienced that to the public eyes most clearly was Princess Diana, who was born a very shy Cancerian. In fact, when she was first engaged to Prince Charles, she was called Shy Di. And eventually she became this wonderful, luminous world stage star after her progressed sun went into Leo. So let's take a look at her chart. And we can see that Cancerian sun tucked away in the 8th house. So this tells us that she would have a little trouble exerting that Cancerian need to nurture others and to be nurtured. We know, for example, that she had a lonely childhood. She lived in kind of a remote country house. Her parents were divorced, so she was most of her time with a very cold and remote father, very formal. She would see her mother on every other weekend because her father had custody. So that Cancerian sun was suffering, not really having that warmth and nurturing. And if we look at her chart, we can see that Cancerian sun is not in direct opposition, but it is by sign in opposition to a very strong Saturn in Capricorn that likes formality, that likes protocol, that likes structure. So she's this very warm and caring, little child in this very cold and distant type of environment. And if we kind of look at that chart, we can see, oh, yes, eventually that progressed sun is going to meet that Saturn by opposition. And so if we start thinking about her life as a young person, we know that this sun is eventually going to get to 23 degrees of Cancer in 1975. And so notice that at that point, that is a significant degree in her chart because it is exactly square her IC and midheaven. And it was at this time in 1975 that her father assumed his title, and she formally became known as Lady Diana. I guess Lady Diana is actually sort of a title in England. And so at the same time, her status changed. She also moved to the county seat for the Earls of Spencer, which was even a grander and more remote country mansion. At the same time, her father had remarried to a stepmother that she just absolutely detested. So again, you can see that Cancerian, that kind of warm, fuzzy Cancerian energy bumping up against this very cold and formal structure in her life. And so as she went through the next few years, she eventually would go to boarding school and then finally leave school around the age of 16 and settle in a flat in London with some friends and do some odd jobs. And so this, you can see the progressed sun when it reaches 24 degrees is going to be making a nice sextile to that Venus in its own sign of Taurus, where it's very happy. And notice it's in the 6th house, the sign of service. And it's in these later years of school that she starts doing what we call community service and finds that she has a real love for doing, visiting people, going into different hospitals or situations where people are having difficulties. And so she's tapping into the empathy of her Cancerian heart. We see also that she has an Aquarian moon, which would be a very strong moon in her chart since she's a Cancerian. So she finds that she has that kind of common touch with people. She can really meet with and talk with anyone. And then she's also coming out of her shell a bit because she's for the first time in sort of a loose and friendly environment with friends and going to parties and things like that. So that's the late 70s. In 1980, though, what happens is that her sun reaches 27 degrees of Cancer. Sorry, my drawing's a little oofy here. And notice when the sun is here at 27 degrees of Cancer, it is exactly in opposition to that Saturn in Capricorn. So that's kind of the shoe that's been waiting to drop. most of her life. And in the summer of 1980, when the sun reaches this point, this is when she kind of comes under the radar of the royal family. She had known Prince Charles for a few years, but it's during this time that they start connecting and dating a little bit, and they become a little interested with each other. He and his family see her as a potential, suitable bride, and she sees him as this kind of lonely older man. And so they're kind of intrigued with each other. And so at this point, then she is moving towards her engagement, which would happen, and marriage, which would happen a year later. And so you see, as the sun has reached this point, this is a very significant turn in her life. Your progressed sun is only going to be at this point once. And it doesn't even happen for everyone, kind of depending where the sun and Saturn fall in your natal chart. And so her Cancerian sun, thinking that she's found love, thinking that she's found a family, that Cancerian sun is finally going to find the home that it's been longing for, all in that opposition, which we know now, of course, looking back, that it was not what she was expecting or hoping. The man she thought she loved was actually in love with another woman. The family was very mired in protocol, even colder and more distant than her own father. And so at this point, then she's struggling, as a Cancerian, to find a place, a home within this family and within this marriage. But then, as she is moving through her early years of marriage and motherhood, something then does happen. And that is that the sun reaches, the sun reaches Leo in November of 1982. Prince William had been born the July before. And so now she's got the sun, here, we'll just make a nice sun, here in Leo. And the sun loves to be in Leo. It's its own sign. And it's during this time she and Prince Charles took a trip to Australia. And she fought very hard to be able to take her baby with her. Imagine that, a new mother wanting to have her baby with her for a months-long trip. And she emerged on the stage as kind of a star. People started paying more attention to her than they did to Prince Charles when they were traveling. And the world kind of fell in love with this beautiful princess. And so this was a turning point for her, that she's eventually learning that she would for the rest of her days, that she could find that love and kind of nurturing, caring that she was seeking by really putting herself out to others and the world. She found also that she tapped back into that Cancerian empathy. Remember, she's carrying the Cancerian heart with her as she is starting to evolve into a Leo. So she's a Cancerian kind of with a Leo coat at this point. And so she's learning that she can put that Cancerian energy out into the world through her public appearances and work and causes. And in return, she's getting the love and admiration that she is missing in her personal life. So these are all wonderful things, starting to happen for her. But of course, it does not go over well with the royal family that she becomes a star when they are being kind of left in her dust. And so lots of tensions start growing within her marriage. She is quiet about it for a while, but around 1988, by then her husband had resumed his affair with Camilla Parker Bowles. They were not communicating on any level at all. So when the sun gets to about 5 degrees of Leo, it's opposing that Jupiter. And Jupiter is her ruling planet. She's a Sag rising. And she is less and less willing at that point to pretend that they're this happy family, and is becoming a lot more vocal and demonstrative about her unhappiness in her marriage. She also, I think, at that time confronts Charles' mistress and starts to cause a lot of problems within the home. But also, as we get into 1991, the marriage is by then pretty much in tatters. And Diana just feels more and more that she needs to get her story out. She's been expressing herself since the progressed sun opposed Jupiter. And when it comes to square that secretive Neptune in Scorpio in her 12th house, she begins to make tapes for a journalist named Andrew Morton, telling him her story and what she's suffered. She's been very open about eating disorders. She's very open about Charles and her not having a happy marriage and all the difficulties that she was experiencing with the royal family. She kind of laid it all out there for him. So you can see with that progressed sun in Leo needing to express itself, with the base, with the root in Cancer, the insecurities, and to express it in a kind of a very secretive, behind the scenes way. And a year later, the book, Diana's Story, would be published by Andrew Morton. And he was very secretive about where he got the information. They tried to convince people that it was just his research, but people who read the book thought, well, there was information in that book that only Diana could have shared. And so the fact that she had participated in this tell-all biography really started the beginning of the end of her marriage and her relationship to the royal family. And so for the rest of the years of her life, the sun is continuing to move through Leo. She is more and more emerging as a star, that sun in Leo, on the world stage in the 9th house, finding an outlet for that Cancerian empathy through her causes, finding kind of a warmth and a caring through her public. I think she said in an interview during this time she wanted to be the people's princess. But what was the progressed sun doing in 1997, the year her life ended? And so we'll pull up. This will be a lot to look at, but I will focus on just a few things in this chart. The inner wheel is Diana's natal chart. The middle wheel is her progressed chart in July at her birthday in 1997. And then the outer chart is the transits of the planets in Paris at the time of her fatal accident. And so while, there's tons to look at in this chart, we could actually spend hours with it. We'll stay just with this progressed sun, because notice this progressed sun here is at 14 degrees of Leo. And you think, well, that's not too much. It doesn't seem to pick up too many different points in her chart. I'm sorry, this is not working for me. I think I'll just put a little thing on it here. We'll just kind of put a line by it. And so we've got this progressed sun at 14 degrees. One thing it does is it hits the midpoint between her Jupiter and Moon in the 3rd house. Jupiter is particularly significant this year because Diana is in a 3rd house perfection year at her birthday. And so Jupiter rules her chart that year, and it is her natal ruler. And then notice the Moon is the ruler of her 8th house. And so her chart ruler, the ruler of her house of death, both being emphasized in this 3rd house perfection year. And then progressed sun is at the midpoint between these two planets, kind of bringing them together. But of course, in Paris that night, at the time of the accident, something else very startling is happening again. We've got the Moon, transiting Moon, and the IC together at that moment in Paris, at the moment of her car accident. And then we've got, at the same time, the midheaven and Jupiter together. And so what we're seeing then is an opposition between the moon and Jupiter in the transiting chart, her chart ruler, emphasized because it's her perfected ruler, and then that ruler of her house of death. They're in opposition to each other. That opposition is right with the midheaven IC line, and then both are crossing that progress degrees, 14-degree Leo progress sun. And so this is something else Stephen Forrest points out to us, that it's important to look at transits to our progressed sun as well, especially when they land so significantly as they do in this chart. So you can see emphasized third house, she's in a car accident, ninth house in a foreign country. And then just the kind of worldwide stunning news that this would be, that she would become, her story would eclipse all other stories in the world for many days to come. And so we've got then, kind of the tale of the progressed sun moving through Princess Diana's chart. If we go back to her natal chart, we can just see kind of the sadness of this, that in just 4 years, the sun would have reached a trine to her ascendant from her ninth house. So you can see that her traveling, her causes, her international fame would just be boosting her to new levels of confidence and belief in herself. She would have with the progressed sun meeting that Uranus, some very interesting turns, especially since her Uranus natally was in sextile to her midheaven. So you could see that being a turning point for her. And then around 50, she would have had the progressed sun making that wonderful transit into Virgo. So she could have used all of her star power for some really wonderful service to the world, with Mars and Pluto there, maybe establishing some sort of an enduring institution to help and serve others. So I think looking at the progressions in this chart really tells us that she was taken from us way too soon, that she still had many, many more wonderful years ahead of her. So anyway, that's the track of the progressed sun. I'd encourage you, if you haven't done so already, to look to see where the progressed sun is in your chart right now. Has it changed signs? Is it getting ready to change signs? Is it forming a particular aspect? You can find your progressed sun by using software. Even astro.com, you can get your secondary progressed chart and find your progressed sun that way. Or else just use a simple ephemeris and count down the number of days after you were born as you have years in life, and you'll see where that progressed sun is. So this is a very exciting technique. I'm looking forward to using it in charts from now into the future. And I thank Stephen Forrest very much for his inspirational book and all of his wonderful knowledge. So thank you very much for joining me. I'll see you next week.